In the spring of 1843, along a forgotten bend of the Mississippi River, there stood an estate known as Briarwood. The house rose from the earth like something determined never to fall. 3 stories of whitewashed brick, tall columns flanking its veranda, and windows that reflected the southern sun like polished glass. From a distance, Briarwood looked like prosperity itself. Cotton fields stretched beyond it in neat, endless rows, their pale blossoms fluttering like drifting snow under the humid sky. But beneath that orderly landscape, something else had taken root. By the end of that year, 17 enslaved laborers connected to Briarwood would be buried on the edge of the property. Officially, their deaths were attributed to fever, heat stroke, or natural causes. No doctor examined them, no coroner recorded their passing. Each burial was conducted swiftly, usually at dusk, and the soil was tamped flat before dawn could expose fresh earth. For a time, no one questioned it. The master of Briarwood was a man named Nathaniel Calder. He was not a loud man, nor was he known for drunken rages or theatrical cruelty. On the contrary, neighbors described him as measured, articulate, even reserved. He attended church regularly and donated modest sums to local improvements. He prided himself on being seen as a modern planter, educated, rational, and disciplined. His wife, Eliza Calder, moved through the estate like a careful shadow. She kept the books, oversaw the kitchen, and maintained quiet authority among household servants. Visitors often remarked on her composure. She spoke gently, dressed plainly, and seemed immune to the emotional storms that sometimes gripped plantation life. Together, they cultivated an image of stability. Yet patterns began to emerge that could not be ignored forever. The first death had been recorded in late May. A young field hand named Isaiah was said to have collapsed during harvest. Witnesses were told he had suffered a sudden fever. Within hours, he was buried near the far tree line. No minister presided. The explanation was accepted, if uneasily. Then another laborer fell ill, and another. In nearly every case, the illness appeared sudden. Those afflicted complained of confusion, weakness, and a strange, overwhelming fatigue. Some spoke of vivid visions in their final hours, descriptions of bright light, distant voices, or loved ones long dead calling their names. To those forced to witness these deaths, the symptoms seemed unnatural, but fear silenced speculation. Over the next 6 months, the count rose steadily. By autumn, whispers had begun among the enslaved community. They noticed that most of the deceased had worked directly under Nathaniel's supervision. Many had recently expressed exhaustion from extended field hours. Several had attempted to slow their pace of labor in quiet protest. The correlation was impossible to ignore. Still, no one dared speak openly. Then came the incident that altered everything. A 12-year-old boy named Samuel, son of 2 field laborers, disappeared one humid evening after being assigned to carry water to a distant section of the plantation. When he did not return by nightfall, his mother searched frantically, calling his name until her voice cracked. The overseer insisted the boy had likely wandered off or drowned in the river. But Samuel's body was discovered 2 days later. He was found near the boundary fence, partially concealed beneath loose soil and leaves. There were no obvious wounds, yet those who saw him insisted his expression was not peaceful. His small hands were clenched tightly, as though he had tried to grasp something that was no longer there. This time, word spread beyond Briarwood. A neighboring farmer, troubled by the mounting rumors, traveled to the county seat and lodged a complaint. Reluctantly, local authorities dispatched a magistrate to conduct a quiet inquiry. It was not an act of moral outrage, but rather of administrative curiosity. 17 deaths within a single estate risked drawing unwanted attention to the region. The magistrate arrived in early November. He began by reviewing plantation records. Eliza Calder presented meticulously kept ledgers. Every laborer was accounted for. Each death had a written explanation: heat stroke, fever, ague. The handwriting was consistent, the dates orderly, the numbers precise. Too precise. When questioned about the burials, Nathaniel remained calm. He insisted disease was common in the lowlands and that he had acted swiftly to prevent contagion. He expressed regret for each loss and emphasized the financial disadvantage of losing laborers. The argument was practical, almost clinical. Yet something unsettled the magistrate. It was not merely the number of graves, but their arrangement. Upon inspection of the burial ground, he observed that each grave had been dug to identical depth and spacing. The soil showed signs of uniform compression. These were not hurried, emotional burials. They were methodical, deliberate. The magistrate ordered one grave exhumed. What emerged from the earth was a body too well preserved for a simple fever death. There were no lesions typical of yellow fever, no swelling consistent with malaria. Instead, faint discoloration around the mouth and fingertips suggested poisoning. Further examination revealed similar findings in 2 additional graves. The news rippled outward. Under mounting pressure, the Calders' home was searched. Beneath loose floorboards in Nathaniel's private study, investigators uncovered several small glass vials. Their contents were nearly depleted, but residue remained. A physician later identified traces of compounds derived from foxglove and nightshade, plants known to disrupt the heart and nervous system when administered in calculated doses. The pattern became clear.
Rather than inflicting visible violence, Nathaniel Calder had chosen subtlety. Small quantities of poison mixed into evening rations could produce weakness, hallucinations, and eventual cardiac failure. The symptoms mimicked common southern illnesses. Death would appear natural. Questions would fade. Why? That answer proved more complex. Testimony from surviving laborers revealed escalating tensions in the months before the deaths began. Several of those buried had resisted increased quotas. Some had quietly organized to demand shorter field hours. There had even been murmurs of escape. Nathaniel, obsessed with order and efficiency, viewed dissent not merely as inconvenience, but as infection. To him, resistance threatened the delicate balance of authority upon which his estate depended. Eliminate the perceived instigators, and the rest would fall silent. And for a time, they did. Eliza's role remained ambiguous. She claimed ignorance, insisting her husband handled all medicinal preparations. Yet investigators noted her access to household supplies and her unwavering composure during interrogation. Some suspected she knew more than she admitted. Others believed she had simply chosen not to see. The trial, held the following year, drew crowds from across the county. For many, the proceedings were less about justice for the dead and more about preserving the region's reputation. A conviction risked exposing systemic brutality that polite society preferred to ignore. Nathaniel maintained his calm demeanor throughout. He argued that plantation management required difficult decisions. He denied intentional murder, suggesting experimental tonics meant to strengthen laborers had produced unintended consequences. He portrayed himself as a rational man undone by unfortunate medical miscalculations. But the evidence was overwhelming. 17 graves, 17 patterns, 17 lives, reduced to ledger entries. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Nathaniel Calder was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Eliza was never formally charged, though she departed Briarwood shortly after the verdict and vanished from public record.
The estate itself fell into decline. Without steady leadership and burdened by scandal, it was eventually abandoned. The cotton fields reverted to wild growth. The great house, once pristine, began to crumble under relentless southern storms. Today, little remains of Briarwood, but fragments of brick and the uneven ground where graves once lay. The wooden markers have long since rotted away. Names were never carved in stone. Yet the story endures. Historians debate whether Nathaniel acted alone or represented something broader, a distilled expression of a system built on control, fear, and dehumanization. His methods were calculated, but the environment that enabled him was vast. What distinguishes Briarwood is not merely the cruelty, but the quiet precision. There were no public whippings to draw attention, no dramatic confrontations, only measured doses administered under cover of routine, transforming supper into sentence. 17 graves stand as silent testimony. They remind us that evil does not always roar. Sometimes it calculates. Sometimes it writes carefully in ink and balances its accounts. Sometimes it wears respectability like a tailored coat and attends church on Sunday morning. And sometimes it buries its evidence before dawn.